Hi, welcome to another edition of the Alan Rosenberg Show. In 1979, I was 16 years old. I was reading a magazine called Trouser Press. I still have the episodes, the issues. Trouser Press was a great magazine. They used to cover what was going on across the pond, the punk scene, the new wave scene, bands that you would read about but weren't really getting any play here in the United States, bands like The Jam. They were talking about a band called The Pretenders. Fascinating story when I was reading it. It was led by Chrissie Hynde, a woman who was from Akron, Ohio, who went over to London around 1973, started getting involved in the punk scene. She knew Mick Jones of The Clash, she knew Sid Vicious, she worked at the sex store, and she was a songwriter wannabe and trying to make it. And she had done a version of a song called Stop Your Sobbing, a Kinks song that basically nobody knew at that time. Although, because it was becoming such a hit for the Pretenders, the Kinks started playing it, and I was a huge Kinks fan. So now all of us Kinks fans knew Stop Your Sobbing because of the Pretenders hit. So anyway, that was around 1978 when Chrissie Hynde formed the Pretenders. They did Stop Your Sobbing. Nick Lowe produced it, and they got picked up by a guy named Dave Hill, who had a small record label called Real Records, and put out Stop Your Sobbing. I couldn't get it here in the United States, but I was fascinated with this band, The Pretenders, led by this woman from Akron, Ohio, who supposedly was great. That was like around 1979. The summer of 79, I was in Manhattan. I used to go to Manhattan all the time to the coolest record stores you could imagine, buy bootlegs and things like that. But they had stuff from the UK, and I found this single of The Pretenders on Real Records right there. You can see it's got the small spindle hole. That's UK. Side A was Kid, and side B was Tattooed Love Boys. And I was like, this is the coolest music I've heard in a lifetime, and that was with 1979. Punk, yet melodic, wonderful guitar work. And from this single, Kid, I could not wait to get the debut album from the Pretenders, which came out in January of 1980, along with their next single called Brass in Pocket. And this was the original 45 of that, and it had an unreleased B-side from the album. So, and here it is. Again, this was a UK import of Brass in Pocket and Swing in London, Nervous But Shy, two unreleased B-sides. So, long story short, this is one of the few times in my musical life that I was into a band right when they were breaking. And when they released their debut album, and this is the new CD, Deluxe Edition, and I bought it on vinyl. It came out in 1980, along with Brass in Pocket, was a huge, huge hit. The album hit number one in the UK and hit top 20 in the US, top 15 even. Was a really big hit. We used to hear Brass in Pocket all the time, and it was awesome. It was produced by Chris Thomas, who really was like the fifth member of the Pretenders and did an incredible job. And I became a huge, huge Pretenders fan from the get-go. In fact, I got to see them back then when they actually came over to the United States and toured. And I'm going to show you from my archives book. This is a book that I have of concerts I would go to. And let me show you some cool stuff. So the first time I saw the Pretenders was a really special concert. It's on this page right there from my scrapbook. Dr. Pepper Central Park Music Festival, The Pretenders. Featuring Chris Spedding on the encore special guest Sir Douglas Quintet. They were the opening act. And the cool thing about this show, that was the last concert ever in Central Park at the Women's Skating Rink, which was where they used to have concerts. And this is from my scrapbook. The ticket price was a whopping $5. My sister took me into the city, and we saw that unbelievable concert, one of my favorite concerts of all time. Central Park in 1980. The first Pretender show that I ever saw. And then I did get to see them a couple of other times. Here, 2 years later, in 1980, Pretenders, not pretending, they're biting the apple. There it is with the opening act Vega at the Palladium, January of 82. Tickets were $11 right there. And this one actually has newspaper reviews, so I will show you. Here's some newspaper reviews on this page. So, Pretenders heat up the town, and the Pretenders, January 10th, at the Palladium. What does it say? Let's see. Her vocalizing is a clash of styles, melodic yet brash, sultry yet sinister. Great description right there of Chrissie Hynde, one of my favorite vocalists. And they talk about the different musicianships. And there's let's see, what else does it say here? A word about the band. Martin Chambers seemed determined to smash his sticks to splinters. He's from the school of aggressive bashing, of which I am a follower. Honeyman Scott soloed brilliantly. Yeah, they were a really, really special band, that original Pretenders. They had a wonderful mixture that was really unique. Unfortunately, it only lasted like 2 or 3 years. Here's another show. I saw them in Albany. I was in school at Albany at the Palace Theater, and that was January 29th of 82. And that was really the end of the original Pretenders. I saw them after that. Here is another one at Jones Beach in 1984, and that's with Robbie McIntosh, the later edition of that classic Pretenders. But they had Pete Farndon on bass, of course, and the debut album, you could really get a look at them. There's Pete Farndon right there. And he's like a tough, leather-jacketed rocker, punk kind of a guy, tough, a little bit older. James Honeyman Scott, who loved pop music, so his guitar lines were really melodic and beautiful, punky and new wave-ish as well, but had great tone and great melody, and he added tremendously to Chrissie's song. And Chrissie would say that. He was her go-to guy. He would take her songs and make them even more melodic and more hooky. And that was a big part of the band. And Martin Chambers, an extraordinary drummer who, me being a drummer, when I saw the Pretenders live, I used to just stare at him. He was a hard-hitting drummer, putting on a show back there. But a technical drummer. When you listen to these two Pretenders albums, he's doing amazing things. You listen to Tattooed Love Boys. He is switching the beat. There's a break in it. It's not easy, and he does these great fills. And even like Talk of the Town, it's not straight drumming, and it's just wonderful. They were a magical unit, and that was them on the debut album. Now, I'll show you something else. Here was the original tour programs that I got back then. So this is the 1980 tour program. Back in the day, these tour programs are mostly photos, but I thought you might get a kick out of this. This is the original Pretenders on their 1980 tour, and bought this at the show. And they were really exciting. Back then, the female rock stars, and she was the songwriter and the front person. But, who'd you have back then? And I loved them. But, you had like Carly Simon, Stevie Nicks, and Linda Ronstadt. It was rare. I guess you had the Runaways and you had Joan Jett. But Joan Jett really wasn't much of a songwriter. She was mostly doing covers. And Chrissie was unique and probably still my favorite female vocalist of all time. Wonderful voice, melodic, brash, but also she has a phrasing that is so unique. I always joke that I could listen to Chrissie Hynde sing, the phone book, and I would enjoy it because her phrasing is just spectacular. So this is the tour book from that original 1980 tour of what they look like. And they really were a magical, magical unit when they started. The other tour program is from 1984, and that's a different band with Robbie McIntosh. I'll show you briefly. I used to love Martin's drums. That was a cool set that he had back then. And but this was a latter-day version from Learning to Crawl with Malcolm Foster on bass and the great Robbie McIntosh on guitar. But that's a latter-day version of the band. After the debut album, which was a huge hit, here in America, to keep it going, they did release their EP called Extended Play, which had Message of Love and Talk of the Town, which would later appear on their second album. It also had Cuban Slide, and one of my favorite tracks that was really an outtake from the debut album. And they threw in a live version of Precious from, you guessed it, from Central Park, the concert that I was just showing you. So that was a thrill for me, and I was like, oh my God, I'd give my arm if they would release that show live, because I was there. Part of it is on the deluxe edition of Pretenders 2. Unfortunately, the magic wouldn't last. In 1981, in the summer, they released the second album, Pretenders 2. Did really well. It hit like 7, I think, in the UK, and in the United States, it went top 10. Not quite as big as the debut album. But a lot of people had, a lot of critics had their fangs out, so to speak, saying it's not that good of an album. I contradicted all the time. I think Pretenders 2 is a phenomenal album. They were constantly on the road. They were really pushing the debut album. They toured relentlessly, and that puts a lot of stress on them, and they had a huge hit. So, the record company wanted a follow-up. That's why they did EP. She didn't really have a lot of time to write the tracks for Pretenders 2. Considering that, I think she did a marvelous job. Pretenders 2 is very much a retread of the debut album, and yeah, it's not quite as good, but it's still pretty great. So, like on Pretenders 2, you got The Adulteress. That's kind of the very, it's not as good as Precious on the debut album, but it's pretty awesome. Bad Boys Get Spanked. Well, yeah, that's kind of a retread in a sense of Tattooed Love Boys, but it's still pretty great. Message of Love's great single. And then I Go to Sleep is a Ray Davies track that was unknown. It was just a piano demo. And that's one of my favorite Pretenders tracks is I Go to Sleep for Pretenders 2. And a lot of, there's so much variety. But Pretenders 2 has, amazing classics. Talk of the Town is on here. Day After Day is a great track. Louie Louie is a really upbeat ending to the album. One of the great things about the Pretenders of the band, and Chrissie as a songwriter, she covers so many different genres. They rock hard like punk, but they do beautiful melodic stuff like Birds of Paradise and English Roses, and Waste Not, Want Not is like a reggae track, and you have that on the debut album with, like Private Life is kind of like a reggae instrumentalist a little bit, and you got punk rock on here, Up the Neck. Mystery Achievement is a 4x4 thumper. It is just awesome. Pack It Up is a great punk rock track. These two albums are priceless to me. They're two of my favorite albums of all time. And it really doesn't get any better at that time, back in 1979, 1980, and 1981. These are spectacular releases. And that, unfortunately, was the end of the Pretenders. Musical differences. The bass player Pete Farndon, who you can see on this cover, was definitely like a punk rocker. He did not love all these ballads. They were starting to work on Back on the Chain Gang, and he wasn't really feeling it. I'll show you some other singles. Here's I Go to Sleep, original 45 again. These are English imports. I used to go to the city and pick them up. But they were working on Back on the Chain Gang, actually, and Farndon was not into it, and he had heroin issues and just musical differences, internal friction, drug abuse, and they fired Pete Farndon in June of 82. And the craziest thing happened 2 days later, June 16th of 1982, James Honeyman Scott, her partner, musical partner really, and the guitarist who added so much to the band, he died, heart failure from cocaine overdose, 2 days after they fired Pete Farndon. So all of a sudden, it was just Chrissie and Martin Chambers. And isn't that the craziest thing? She fires a bass player and the guitarist dies 2 days later. Pete Farndon unfortunately passed away the following year, April of 83. He drowned in a bathtub from a heroin overdose. So did not have a happy ending. But of course, Chrissie would never stop. And I never stopped following her and loving her. And as you can see here, I have everything by the Pretenders, you name it, I got it, box sets. This is a phenomenal box set that goes into their whole history. It's spectacular, highly recommended if you're a fan. If you're not a big fan of the Pretenders, there are other options, and I'm going to show you. So What I just showed you here is the deluxe box sets of these two albums. You don't have to get that. These are deluxe editions of the first two albums as well, and these are 2-disc versions. And these suffice. I'm really glad to have these. It's got the demos, and it's fascinating to listen to how much Chris Thompson, the producer, adds. There's a big difference between the quality of the demos and the official releases. But you get the demos on here to a certain extent. You get live stuff on here. I'm glad I have both versions, but if you love the Pretenders, these are good enough, honestly. But these are essential albums, in my opinion. You should definitely have them. But, she continued on an amazing, amazing career. I mean, the next album they did, Learning to Crawl, was a classic, a huge record. There's Back on the Chain Gang and Thin Line Between Love and Hate and Hurt 2,000 Miles, Middle of the Road. These are great. And then she did Get Close. So all really solid albums. You can get the singles. That's a really good initial best of with 16 tracks. You'll love it. I mean, this is some of the greatest music of all time. Some of the albums are a little bit patchy. There's Packed is okay. I have live bootlegs because I'm a huge fan. This is a really great latter-day album, although, God, this is probably 30, 40 years old already, right? But this is a great one. Last of the Independents. I'll Stand By You is a great track. There's a recording of 977. Here's another bootleg. She did an unplugged record, The Isle of You, which was nice. Viva El Amor. Another live bootleg I have. This is a more deluxe greatest hits album. This is highly recommended. It's got more tracks on it, and it covers some additional latter-day records. So this is an excellent one to get. Another bootleg. I have tons of Pretenders. Loose Screws, another album. Here's another live one. And Alone, and Relentless, and Hate for Sale. That was a really strong latter-day one. She's done some great stuff outside the Pretenders. JP, Chrissie, and the Fairground Boys. Fidelity is one of my favorite albums. That's a must-have if you find it out there. Stockholm was a good solo record. And then Standing in the Doorway. She covers Bob Dylan is okay. And then the one from last year, Duet Special, was a really good duets covers album. Oh, and I forgot Break Up the Concrete's another good one. So, I am a huge fan. But with that said, nothing comes close to those original first two records. They are essential to the best albums of rock and roll, in my opinion. And it didn't hurt that I was, at that time, like I said, 16, 17 years old. And one of the few times where I actually was into a band right at the get-go. And that's always special when music is so important. So let me know your thoughts about the great Pretenders, Chrissie Hynde and the Pretenders. So what you're asking, why am I wearing a Stevie Nicks shirt? Because there it is, the Pretenders. It's interesting. They're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as they deserve. But it seems like the Pretenders are oftentimes an opening act. They were the opening act for Stevie Nicks. I went to this concert strictly to see the Pretenders, and as much as I like Stevie Nicks, and I do, the Pretenders were much better than Stevie Nicks was. Even my wife said that. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts. If you're new to my channel, hit subscribe. Lots of playlists, lots of videos, but I did a video the other day when music is so special to us, and if you watch my channel, it's very special to you as well. But music is really special when you get into a band right at the get-go, and they really deliver all the goods, and you're like right there. And this was one of those times when the Pretenders came out. So thanks so much again. Have a great day. I will see you next time on the Alan Rosenberg Show, and hit subscribe.